Well, Jesus said a lot of other things to kind of weigh the balance. It's not all about hellfire and brimstone, as it was in the second reading about the rich. But the first reading and the third are very important, because in the first one, people tell Moses, there are some people who are not following us, so throw them out. And Moses says, no, let them come in. Jesus says the same thing about people who are not part of his immediate entourage, and he says, let them come in. Ours is a faith of inclusion. We don't throw people out. Those there. But I'd like to talk to you about three things, two of them really informational, because sometimes people hear things and they don't quite understandably don't quite get what they're all about. The first thing is in the creed that we'll be saying in a few minutes. It says that after Jesus died, he descended. What is Jesus doing in hell? Well, the word hell in English doesn't really do justice. We don't have a word in English that does justice to the idea that comes to us there. In all of the ancient religions, ancient thought ideas, people believed that one lived on after life. They believed in the immortality of the soul. But they thought that life after death was kind of a gray, gloomy underworld where people weren't very happy and they were just stuck there. When we took that into Christianity, the idea was that after death, before Jesus came, a lot of people were living, but they weren't very happy. So when Christians thought of Jesus after his death, going into the underworld, he wanted to release them, to set them to be in his kingdom with all the rest of us. So when you hear the word hell in the creed, it doesn't mean the hell of fire and damnation. It means a life that is not as happy as the life that we have when we belong to Christ. So you can say that without any qualms, okay? The second thing has to do with the consecration of the bread and wine at the altar. When I was a student many, many years ago studying theology, one of my most revered teachers taught us that the liturgy is one of the ways in which the church teaches us. It's not all in books of theology, in decrees that come out of Rome. It's in the liturgy itself. So just before the consecration of the bread and wine, the priest says, Lord, send your Holy Spirit to come down on these gifts, that they may be made holy. Holy. So it isn't the priest who's doing it. It's the Spirit of God who is doing it. The priest is simply one who calls down. Ask God, please, send down your Spirit on these gifts. I can't change bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. That's the work of God. So I call upon God and ask him to bring down his Spirit into these gifts of ours, the gifts that we have brought together. What's the important thing about that in the world that we live in today? As we know, most of the terrible things that have gone on in the church for a long time are the result of what we call the culture of clericalism. Clericalism, which exalts priests in a way that makes them higher or superior and somehow worthy of more attention than the people of God. You are the people of God. We, the priests, are your servants. That's what we're supposed to be. Unfortunately, there has come to be a kind of culture in which priests are made very much of, often with good intentions on the part of the people, showing respect and goodwill. But what we are here for is, first of all, to be servants, not to sit on top of anybody. Remember last Sunday's gospel? The disciples of Jesus are arguing among one another. Who's going to be the top dog in the kingdom? You don't get it. You're not here to have positions of authority, of high standing. If you want to be the first in my kingdom, you have to be the last. And if you want to be a leader, you have to be a servant. So the clerical culture which has made priests something other than servants, is very wrong, very bad, and has produced a great deal of misery and unhappiness in the church. So we're trying to get away from that. Get back to the idea which was given to us at the Second Vatican Council. What is the Church of God? You and we, all of us together, the people of God, we are the church. The last thing I would call to your attention really fits in with that, the fact that we have gifts in ourselves. We don't have to look at what's going on around us. We don't have to look up to some leader who is dominating us. We have great gifts of treasure within ourselves. And I read something the other day that I thought really expressed that very well. It's the fact that we have enormous and unsuspected treasure within our being, an undiscovered continent. Within ourselves, we have a vast treasure, like a great continent, that's present inside of us. That's the blessing, the grace that we have of being the people of God. In the first place, it comes from our being human beings. We are human, and as human beings, we have a great treasure, a great continent of goodness within ourselves. We have a can call upon that we can look into. If we examine ourselves, think about ourselves and our lives, there's so much inside of us that is good, that is being of a higher order than we normally think of. We have to think about that. We have to reflect about that. We have to reflect about it once in a while, maybe every Sunday. Every day would be better. To realize the treasure that we have within ourselves, in our humanity, and that humanity raised up by the presence of Christ, who became one of us, taught us that within each and every one of you, there is a treasure, there is a blessing, there is something that gives you the strength and the power to live your daily life. We have to think about that in times like ours, when there is so much trouble in our country, in our church, in ourselves. All of those things are taken up in the humanity of Christ and the blessing and the goodness that He has put inside of each and every one of us. And that gives us the power that we mentioned at the beginning in the opening prayer, the power of God, which is His mercy and His goodness that He gives to us and that we can share with one another.